Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this week's History Speaks, we have a guest that will guide us all on a journey through Tudor time. Her fascination with one man makes for an enthralling conversation. She's a lady with a passion for one of the mightiest rulers England has ever seen, and her book, The Apple and the Tree, explores the story of none other than Henry VIII. If you've seen the book or even read it, then you're in for a treat as we go back to the early 16th century and a look into the life of Henry, but unlike anything you've heard before. So please give a warm welcome to my guest today, Clemmie Bennett. Hi, Clemmie. How are you?
Hi, John. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic. It's a beautiful sunny day here, so we can't complain. So before we head into the fascinating world of Henry, I was thinking, hypothetically, of course, well, actually, I think I'm being more of a devil's advocate on this one, but if you could have been his, say, seventh wife, what part of his reign do you think you would have fitted in best? And quite possibly, and more importantly, do you think you'd have survived?
Oh dear, that is a tough question to start with. I think the best time of Henry VIII's reign was the beginning. It was when he was, this young and happy lad, still a little bit unsecure, but not quite yet the paranoid tyrant that we were remembering for. So I think his first, perhaps second wife, depending. Definitely at the beginning of his reign. And with my knowledge, I like to think that I would have survived, but without this knowledge of him and what he becomes, I think it would be very presumptuous to assume that one could survive, because he was very, he was something.
Yeah, it was something else, all right, yeah. I'm just thinking about poor old Catherine of Aragon gets knocked out of the equation then if you're going in at number one, which is fair enough. Right, let's get on with your questions. So how did you first become interested in history, and what's your background?
Well, important thing about me is that I'm French. So I grew up in France and I only moved to the UK in 2016, I think. But I was always interested in history. In school, it was the only subject that I was interested in uni as well. I had these phases with, that the Egyptians and the Greek mythology. And for a long time, I was obsessed about Louis XIV of France, so the Sun King. And then eventually I stumbled upon Henry VIII. We don't study him in France. So for me, I had to learn everything from scratch, and I was just fascinated. And I was studying law in France and I was miserable. And I ended up packing everything, moving to England, and I'm still here and I'm still visiting all these palaces and historical gems, and I just love it.
I think that's the beauty of England. There's so much history here. It's unbelievable. I mean, and France is the same. It's got so much history there. But
absolutely.
Well, it is just both countries are absolutely rich in history, aren't they?
Oh yes, and it's quite overwhelming sometimes because there's so many places I want to go. But I guess that's why I'm still here. So yeah, England.
So, I mean, it's always interesting to hear what initially sparks someone's interest into an historical figure. And I imagine there's a fascinating story behind what drew your focus. So how did you start to grow this fascination for Henry VIII?
Well, I think what drew me in first was the drama. There's a lot of drama. You cannot be bored when you study Henry VIII. The 6 wives, the 3 children by 3 different wives, the break with Rome. And then, being succeeded by Elizabeth when he was so looking for a son. And it is his daughter who ended up ruling for so long. But also, I guess what intrigued me at first was the psychology of Henry VIII, because the man he was at the beginning, so the man he was in 1509, the man he was during the whole Anne Boleyn gate in the 1530s, and then the man he was in 1547 when he died were basically 3 different people. And it's very interesting to put him back into his context and his time and what was happening around him and his upbringing and trying to understand what went through his brain and what ultimately made him the man that we remember today.
Yeah, it definitely there were phases of his life that, you can see the changes that made him what he was, if you like, going forward. It's a very strange kind of story that Henry's got, really. But we've only got, what we've got to go on to try and understand what sort of character he was. Going back to the beginning then, as he ascended to the throne, the country, I guess, was in a bit of a state of uncertainty with shifting political alliances, social challenges. So I'm curious about the early days of his reign, and when Henry became king, what initial impact do you think he had?
Well, actually, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because when Henry VIII became king, there was a sort of relief in England. He was the first king in the world to inherit the crown, the throne, in peace, in absolute peace. His father, Henry VII, had won his crown on the battlefield, so in blood. And then before that, you had Richard III, who had pretty much stolen his crown from his nephew. And there was this whole period of the Wars of the Roses, which had torn England and the nobility apart. So there was this context of violence and blood around the throne and around who would inherit the crown. But for Henry VIII, it was different. Henry VII had many flaws, but he brought stability to England. And when he died, there was absolutely no one wondered who would inherit the crown. It was Henry VIII. It was to be Prince Henry, and then who would become Henry VIII. So he got his crown in a very peaceful time for England, and there was no mean feat in that time in England. And I guess a lot of people were relieved, because Henry VIII was the complete opposite of his father. Henry VII had been, always a little bit of a miser, but after the death of his wife, Elizabeth of York, so in 1503, it had become so much worse. And he was this sad, older man, very stern, very introspected. He didn't have the common touch. He wasn't really good with people. And Henry VIII was the complete opposite. He was loud. He was fun. He loved to have fun, and he was good with the common people. He had the common touch. He was happy. He was just tall and fit and athletic and handsome. So in the eyes of England back then, he was everything that a king should be. He was the golden boy. They had seen him grow up, and he was also just a copy of his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, Edward IV, who had been quite beloved. So people were very happy, very relieved when Henry VIII got to the throne. And I think you're asking the impact that he had. Well, it was joy. People were happy. People were proud that he was their king. He was everything that a king should be.
Mm. And I'm just thinking, we've already determined that you were Henry's first wife, but in actual fact, it was Catherine of Aragon. And of course, that marriage spanned for about 24 years, longer than any of his other unions. And it was a marriage filled with both triumph and challenges. So as the years passed, however, circumstances obviously changed. And what had once been kind of a strong alliance began to unravel. So what went wrong?
Biology, probably. The short answer is that Catherine and Henry didn't manage to conceive a son who lived for more than 2 months. They were married shortly after Henry became king, so that's 1509, and Catherine conceived straight away, almost straight away. But sadly, that first pregnancy wasn't it didn't end with a happy note. And then she gave birth. Her second pregnancy resulted in a son. Everyone was just so thrilled. And, it was the heir. It was supposed to be Henry's heir and successor. But sadly, the little boy, who was called Henry as well, he was born on New Year's Day, 1511. But then I think only 52 days later, he died. And we don't know why he died until even today. We don't know why he died. There are no cause of death. And then Catherine's pregnancy. So Catherine had 6 pregnancies that we know of. I am one of these people who believe that she had more. But out of these 6 pregnancies, only one resulted in a healthy child. And that was a girl. That was Mary, the future Queen Mary I. She was born in 1516. And Catherine was thrilled, and Henry was thrilled as well. We always had this feeling that Henry was devastated when his daughter was born, but he was happy. Mary was their first healthy child, and in his head, it meant that they were able to have healthy children, and so boys would follow. So when Mary was born, everyone was happy, but then, no healthy children followed, and especially no sons. And, well, the first duty of a queen was to give her husband, her king, male heirs to succeed him for the stability of the crown, for the stability of the kingdom. This was literally her first and most important duty. And Catherine, I don't like to say that she failed, but in the eyes of England, in the eyes of Henry, she did fail of giving him this son. He obviously didn't know that the man determined, in biology, determined the gender of the baby. We know that now, so it's quite ironic, really. But Henry didn't know. And when we imagine kings right now, when we imagine kings from the medieval period or the Renaissance period, we imagine them very confident, with their crown and their sword. And Henry was someone who was very insecure. He had earned his crown in a peaceful way, but he was very aware that his father, Henry VII, had battled his entire life against pretenders. And he was very aware that any moment he could be made to fight to keep his crown. He was very, very insecure. And I think the way he acted in later life as well really shows how insecure he was. And the fact that he didn't have a son, the fact that he didn't have an heir, especially when his rival, Francis I of France, had these children and had these sons to succeed him. Henry was extremely insecure. He did not have a son succeed him, and it was almost an attack on his virility. And he needed that son. He needed the son. He also needed it to prove to the world and to the people with even just a drop of royal blood in their veins that God had shown that he favored Henry and his dynasty and his heirs. He needed to show to the world that God was favoring him. And without a son, he couldn't. He only had a daughter, and I'm only with quotation marks, because, well, obviously, but he only had a daughter, and a queen regnant was something that was unheard of. People could not imagine a queen regnant. The last time that it sort of happened was with Empress Matilda, centuries before. And England was in that period of time with Empress Matilda is literally called the anarchy. So people were not ready, didn't feel like they were ready for a queen regnant. So Henry needed the son. And this is what happened with Catherine. This is what brought the marriage to what we know now. And had Mary been born a boy, Henry would have never had 6 wives. He would have kept Catherine until her death. And it's just biology, really.
It's like an obsession that he had, isn't it? It's an unhealthy obsession at that. But moving forward onto this, when the marriage eventually ended, it's fascinating to consider the deeper kind of motivations at play with those two. So why do you think everything changed? And what was his mindset at the time of divorce? If you know that even.
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit harsh here, but here you have to imagine a toddler. Henry had grown up, so he was not his father's first boy. He was the spare heir. He was not his first heir. So, because of this, he grew up in a household with his sisters. So it was a female household with mostly female around him. And he was the boy. He had a brother at some point, but Edmund didn't live for very long. And so he was the only boy. And his mother loved him, which I think is great. And from 16th century standards, she was quite hands-on. And, Henry had a great education, but he never learned to cope with the frustration of being told no. And in the late 1520s, early 1530s, he was in the thick of it. Everyone was telling him no. God was telling him no. God was saying no to a son. Catherine was saying no to the annulment of their marriage. Catherine was refusing to tell Henry what he wanted to hear, which is that she had consummated her marriage with his brother, so with her first husband. And this was why God was refusing to give them a son. So you had God, you had Catherine. The Pope was saying no to Henry, like, no, you can't annul the marriage. You have to stay married to Catherine. And then on top of it, you had Anne Boleyn, who was saying no to Henry about consummating whatever relationship they had. Anne Boleyn was saying, no, we will not have sex if we're not married. So literally everyone was telling him no, and he did not know how to deal with that. It was for a man in the 16th century, but especially for a king, with the personality that he had, it was extremely difficult for him. I am not excusing anything that he did, but when we think about it, I think it gives an insight on the inside of his brain. He literally didn't know how to cope with everyone telling them no. And so what he did was going around the problem. He wanted people to do something, and they would not do it. So he went around it to find another solution. A bit like a toddler who wants a snack and mom says no. So they wait until mom's out of the room and they steal some snack and hide them in their room. It's pretty much the same train of thought. And when he was told of the possibility of breaking with the church, of breaking with Rome, and pushing away the Pope's authority from England, the possibility of Henry being the head of the church, and it was perfect for him. And I think he said yes, and the whole process started without him actually realizing everything that it would entail. All he wanted was to annul the marriage of Catherine in order to marry again and have a son. He was obsessed with Anne Boleyn. I don't believe he was in love with her, but he was obsessed with her because she said no to him. But it was about the son. I don't think it was ever about Anne. He was obsessed with her, granted, but it was always about the son, and it was always about getting what he wanted, and nothing else mattered.
I'm going to move forward again here a little bit because obviously it is a big character to cover. So throughout his reign, Henry VIII dealt with numerous challenges, both politically and personally, often leading to drastic measures. With that in mind, I'd like to explore a particularly significant area of his life regarding his personal relationship, especially his marriages and the decisions he made. that altered not only his reign, but the course of English history. Now, we know Henry had many people executed throughout his reign, but why was there a need to execute any of his wives?
First, for Anne, she was executed for adultery and treason. We know now that it's very unlikely that she did any of these things. The charges were completely trumped up. The charges were, Anne slept with that person on that day, but then we have records that she was actually in another location. So we know she didn't do anything. She was framed. And that was, again, first because she had given birth to a girl, Elizabeth, in 1533, and then had faced a series of miscarriages. So Henry was very impatient. He wanted his son and had promised him a son, and he still didn't have a son to show the world. But it was not just about the gender of the child. It was also quite political. So by then, Henry's government was pretty much led by Thomas Cromwell, and they were in the middle of the dissolution of the monasteries. And Anne was for it. She was happy with the Reformation. She wanted the Reformation to happen. She was aware of all the abuses within the Catholic Church, and she wanted to tackle them. She didn't want she didn't want all the monasteries to suffer. Only the monasteries that actually deserved it. But also, she wanted the money earned from this to go back to the greater good, to education, to the children. She wanted to reuse that money for good. And what Henry and Thomas Cromwell wanted was for this money to get into the royal coffers. Thomas Cromwell had promised Henry that he would make him the richest prince in Christendom. And he was doing it through the dissolution of the monasteries. And Anne was in the middle of that. And Anne was very different from Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She was not demure. She was not quiet. When she thought something, she said it. And she was never scared to actually argue with Henry or with Thomas Cromwell. She knew who she was. She knew what she could do. So she was never quiet. And I think that was her doom. They got rid of her because she was a problem. But they couldn't get rid of her in the way that they annulled the marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Because if they did that, it would have been Henry admitting that he had been wrong, putting aside Catherine of Aragon for Anne Boleyn. And it's something that he would not do. He actually rather be seen as a cuckold than admitting that he had been wrong. So essentially, this is why Anne Boleyn was executed. But for Catherine Howard, it was different. So Henry was older. He was around 50 years old. And Catherine, we don't exactly know her date of birth, but when she died, she was around 18 years old. She was around 18 years old. She was young. And when Henry chose her, he said that she was his rose without a thorn. He was very smitten with her. She was this young, perfect, pretty little thing, and he married her. And in his mind, he genuinely thought that she was perfect. There was nothing wrong with her. She was pure. She was the purest woman that he had ever met. And he found out that she wasn't that pure. She had a past. We always think about Catherine's affair with Thomas Culpeper, although we don't exactly know the sort of affair that she had with Thomas. I believe that it was platonic, that there were feelings, but nothing else. But Catherine didn't die because of that affair with Thomas Culpeper. Catherine died for something that she had done before her queenship. When Catherine was imprisoned in a tower, her execution was delayed because Henry needed to pass a bill through Parliament. And that bill stipulated that any Queen of England with an unchaste past who did not disclose this to her husband within 20 days of the marriage would be guilty of high treason. And obviously, high treason, the penalty was death. And this is why Catherine was executed. This is because of the relationship she had before her marriage to the secretary of the Dowager Duchess, so Catherine's step-grandmother. She had a relationship with that man called Francis Dereham. And this relationship, everything that happened during Catherine's childhood or teenagehood, eventually it came out. It got out. The word got out. And Henry was humiliated. He was older. He was in pain, in constant pain. And he had to admit publicly that he had been wrong about his wife, that his wife was not as pure as he thought she could be, that she was. And I think this is why Catherine had to die, because Henry was so vexed, so sad as well, and humiliated. And Catherine had to pay for that with her head. And I think this is one of the most tragic deaths in Tudor England.
I've got to ask this one. Henry VIII's break from Rome is one of the most significant moments in English history. And the creation of the Church of England shifted religious and political power dramatically. But as we explore Henry's motivations, beliefs, and actions during this time, there's an intriguing point that I think is worth considering. And despite this kind of monumental change, some aspects of his personal faith seem to have remained steadfast. So my question is, when Henry broke from Rome to create the Church of England, is it true that he remained a Catholic?
Well, yeah. He always remained a Catholic at heart. I've read in a book that he always remained a good son of the church, and clearly it's what he was. The break from Rome was never about religion for Henry. It was about control. It was about wealth. It was about being able to make his own decision. And the Church of England was basically Catholicism, but with Henry at the head instead of the Pope. But in his head and his heart, he was always Catholic. I mean, after the break from Rome, he was executing Protestants. He was also executing Catholics who would not recognize him as head of the church. So no one really knew how to do it. No one really knew how to be religious, and it was so at the very center of their lives, and it was very, very difficult because they had to believe exactly what Henry VIII believed, and they had to be religious the way that he was being religious. And this was a very tough middle ground, because his reforms were only halfway, because his heart wasn't in it. He wanted, he had broken with Rome, with the Pope. And for example, the seven sacraments became only three, so that angered the Catholics. But also, he would not go all the way. He would not go far enough for the reformist. So there was really one step forward, two steps backwards. It was in the middle. And I think that's why the kingdom was so unstable in terms of religion, and why so many people were executed. Because I don't think even Henry knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted, Catholicism, but with him at the head of the church, and it didn't work like that. So there was this middle to find, and no one was happy. No one was happy about it. The reformists thought he wasn't going far enough. The Catholics thought he was going too far, and Henry didn't know how to please everybody. He didn't know how to he didn't know how to do it. But inside, he was a Catholic. it was never about religion. It was really about being in control and having stealing. I will use that word because it is what it was, stealing the wealth from the church and put it in his own coffers. But it was not about religion.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think as well that maybe his closest people around him in the so-called government would have chipped in, but maybe they were just too scared of the man himself to say anything, unless it actually agreed with what he was saying. So there was no debate as such about which way he should go, which left it all completely to himself, didn't it?
No, absolutely. And the whole, a debate about religion in the 16th century, it's not something you could debate on. You had to believe a certain way. There was not this religious freedom, not everywhere in the world, sadly, but there was one religion and you had to follow it. And it's not something you could ask questions on and debate on. And especially with Henry VIII, as the years passed, every year that passed, his temper was shorter, and no one really knew. We have a saying in French that said that no one really knew on which foot to dance. So it was impossible to debate with Henry VIII. It's not something that you did.
No, you can see why. Yeah, being reasonable about it all. I guess you can see why. Let's move on to his another role that he did, which was his military campaigns, which were certainly ambitious, especially as he secured his position on the throne. Now, his choices during this time have raised some fascinating questions about his motivations, and it's interesting to consider what might have driven his appetite for war and conquest. So, where do you think Henry's appetite for war came from, and had power by this time actually gone to his head?
I don't think power had gone to his head because he was the king. It was his role to be powerful and driven for war. In the 16th century, conquest, power, it was everything. I said earlier in the interview that the first duty of a queen was to give heirs to the kingdom, to the crown. But the first duty of a medieval Renaissance king was to be strong, was to appear at least strong on the international scene. It was what kings were supposed to do. Kings were supposed to be warriors. Kings were supposed to be strong, to want to conquer the world, and to have this strong military presence. It was very, very important. So this is how he grew up. Maybe not when he was the spare, but as soon as he became the heir, this is how he grew up. He was expected to behave like this. And on the side, well, his hero was his ancestor, Henry V. And Henry V was the great conqueror, the great war hero of Agincourt in 1415. And Henry V was the hero of Henry VIII. And he was all he wanted was to walk in his footsteps and be like him and do like him. Sadly, that didn't happen, but it was what Henry wanted. And I don't think anyone frowned on it, because this is what a king back then was expected to do. This was his role. And for this, on the side of all the executions and the instability, I think it's also because Henry appeared strong, and no one would dare to look at Henry and say, no, you're not a good king. No one would dare to do that back then. He was the king. He was strong. And I think his military, his obsession with it, was also quite a lot to, it meant that he appeared strong. And this is all that kings in the 16th century were supposed to do, were supposed to be. For this, he fit the bill practically.
Yeah, I guess he did, because I think we touched on it, I guess, in the last question, when people were too scared to say no to him. Because that was his power. It was this overwhelming power that engulfed everybody in his court, in his palace,
absolutely.
and in his kingdom. So that's just the way he was. But considering...
Exactly. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, considering his well-known temperament, which has been marked by impatience, stubbornness, and a tendency towards unforgiving behaviour, we might wonder how much that influenced his obsession for the male heir. But did that obsession warrant this type of behaviour?
Well, no. I don't think anything excuses what he's done, how he behaved. I mean, he became a real tyrant, and nothing excuses it. It gives a first explanation, though, and it gives an image, the bigger picture of his life, and why he did everything that he did. At least in the first half of his reign, everything he did was for a son. Every thought, every action was driven because of the need of a son, of an heir, of a legitimate heir. And this, with, as you said, his personality, his natural traits that he was born with, his impatience and his stubbornness, as you said, and his very, very short temper that became shorter more and more. When you put this with his immense insecurity, when you put this together, you mush it all together, and then you add the lack of a son, this was a deadly combination. So I do understand. I don't excuse what he's done, but I think if you put yourself in his shoes, at least for the first part of his reign, I understand why he wanted a son so much, especially because England was just coming out of the Wars of the Roses, the Civil War. I understand why he wanted a son. And then when he got his son, well, Henry VIII himself was a spare heir. He knew very well that the king could have one son, and this son could die before becoming king himself. Henry's older brother Arthur, was always supposed to be king, and he died quite young for us, but he was already married, so he was already considered an adult. So Henry knew that a king needed two male heirs to be completely secure, and that's why he continued. But also, his temper grew more dangerous. By almost each passing day, he was more dangerous to be around. He was very paranoid. He was very insecure. He was very angry. He was very bitter. So yes, it was very. I don't excuse what he's done, but I think once you put yourself in his shoes, again, at the first part of his reign, it is. I understand it.
Yeah, it's like you say, at the beginning of his life, he was really cheerful, happy. Everything was going well. But then there's a steady decline to his later years when he's a complete opposite. And it's really strange. But whether he just grew from frustration or I guess we'll never really know. But as we reflect, let's look at his final days. And there seems to have been a sense of ambiguity surrounding his intentions. So what do you think the uncertainty reveals about his mindset in those kind of final moments? Because after his death, he left little in the way of who should succeed him, although his boy Edward took the throne. Do you think even at his last breath, he was still plotting and being indecisive as ever?
No, I don't believe that. I think that Henry absolutely knew who should succeed him. And so throughout his reign, there were 3 acts of succession. First one in 1533 that put Mary out of the line and replaced her with Elizabeth. And then in 1536, when Elizabeth was also put aside. Then in 1544, there was this act of succession, the third one, that put them both back in the line of succession. they weren't legitimized, but they were put back. And Henry, when he died, so his last will, he stamped it with his signature about a month before he died. So he knew it was coming. He knew he was dying. He may not have admitted it out loud, but he knew he was dying. And he confirmed the act of succession in his will. So everyone knew what was supposed to happen. He knew very well how he wanted to be succeeded. So Edward was his successor, his heir, and then the legitimate children of Edward. Should Edward not have children, upon his death, that would be his half sister Mary, so the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, and then the legitimate children of Mary. And then should Mary die also without children, there would be Elizabeth, so the daughter of Anne Boleyn, and her children. So this was the big. This is how Henry was supposed to be succeeded. That was the line of succession. Should none of them, so Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, should they all die childless, and Henry didn't know how right he was, then it would be the granddaughter of Henry's sister Mary, so the Lady Jane Grey, and then her children. And then should she still die childless, the Lady Jane Grey's sister, her children. So it worked like this. Henry had a clear picture of how it was supposed to work. I would say, though, that he was quite anxious about dying when Edward was only 9 years old. Henry's own uncle was Edward V. And, well, Edward V's own uncle, Richard III, was, Lord Protector of the realm, and we all know how that ended up. Yeah. So Henry VIII was very anxious about this happening as well to Edward. Edward was only 9, and a 9-year-old king was a weak king, and a weak king meant a weak kingdom. So I think it's very safe to assume that he was very anxious about that. And so in his will, he appointed 16 people to set up a regency council to rule the kingdom in Edward's name until he was old enough. That's 16 people. That is a lot of people. And this regency council, it was Henry's way to say the power is not going to go in just one person. He was very afraid of just one man ruling England for his son, for obvious reasons. And so he was very, very afraid of this. And I think he was right to be very afraid of this, because only after a couple of council meetings, Edward's uncle, also called Edward Seymour, the brother of Queen Jane Seymour, was appointed Lord Protector of the realm. And I read a wonderful book by Margaret Scard, and the title of this book was King in All But Name. And this is exactly what Edward Seymour became. He became king in all but name. And this is what Henry was trying so hard to avoid. So I think if there was one thing he was plotting for, he was trying to avoid this. And sadly, it happened very, very shortly after his death.
Yeah. And he would have had no idea anyway what happened, would he, when he was dead? So.
Well, no, unless you believe in,
It was just trying to plan the future the best that he possibly thought he could do, and that's as far as it goes. I've got a viewer question for you, and this one's from T for Two, Two for Tea. And if I'm not mistaken, that was actually a song. I don't know if you've ever heard it. I'm not going to sing it, even though I do sound like a nightingale when I do. And for those that have heard me, you'll be aware of that, which is probably zero. So let's get to the question. What are the misconceptions about Henry VIII that you aim to challenge with your book?
Well, the reason why my book starts in 1510 is because I want people to remember that at the beginning, Henry VIII was very different than how we remember him today as this angry, short temper, fat tyrant who just executes first and thinks later. And sure, this is what he became. His reputation is well deserved and well earned, but he wasn't always like that. And I think it's very important to remember how different he was at the beginning, and that his reign is full of tragedies, and especially considering the women, all the women that crossed his path and had their lives shortened because of him, deserved so much better. And this was a real tragedy. But even Henry VIII's reign as a whole was the tragedy, because when he got the throne, when he became king, he had everything. He could have been a wonderful, wonderful king. It could have been a golden age. Well, thank God this golden age happened with his daughter Elizabeth, but it could have been so different. He had everything. He was healthy. He was fit. He was beloved. Everyone loved him. He was happy. He could have had everything. And I'm not sorry that his child, like Catherine, was a girl, Mary the First, because I think she that's a different podcast. Everything about Mary, and I think you've done that already. But had Mary been boy, the entire reign would have been different, because it all started with this. It all started with this frustration, and then you add his very serious accident, his jousting incident in 1536, and then his leg ulcer that never healed, and he was in constant pain. So I do think that he had many, many, many flaws, but ultimately, I think he was depressed at some point. I think it grew into a depression because he couldn't exercise. He didn't have this release of endorphins and adrenaline, and he couldn't be this admired and beloved king that he was before. And for his personality, he was quite a self-centered person. So for his personality, it was very difficult to cope with that. And there are so many factors that made Henry VIII reign as we remember it now. And he behaved appallingly, let's face it. He was a tyrant, and he destroyed lives. And for me, it's fascinating to see all these little bits and bobs that, had one thing been different, the whole bigger picture could have been different too. And I guess this is what I wanted to show. Henry VIII himself is a tragedy. Should someone write a book about him, about a character based on Henry, that would be a negative character arc. But I do think that reading it, we'd get, some readers would get, kind of feel sorry for him, to a certain extent, obviously. But it's, his whole life is a tragedy.
I think as humans, we all make mistakes. There's no doubt about that. And the one thing that we should try and do is learn from those mistakes. But with Henry,
that's what he failed to do.
I don't think Henry ever did, because he never had that opposition to give him another variant on what he was actually thinking. So it must have been really difficult for the guy at times, because it was just his opinion and everybody else was completely terrified and just agreed. So even when he made a mistake, he never actually learns anything from it, because as far as he's concerned, he's always right. He's head of the church. Yes. He's perfect in every way, shape and form. How can a man of his stature be ever wrong? So that's the way I kind of look at it.
It's very hard to grow when no one challenges you, but no one could. And because this was how the world worked. He was more or less, he was God on earth. He was at a very, very height. He was the most important, most powerful person. And this is very different today, because obviously now we still have a king, but it's very different. You just cannot compare Charles III and Henry VIII. And the whole society worked different. And it's also what I wanted to show in the book. They thought differently. The whole thought process was different. And what Henry, and even the women in his life, everything that they grew up learning made them who they were and how they thought. And this is something I really wanted to do in the book as well, trying to get into his psychology and how he thought and how it made sense for him. It doesn't make sense for us now, but it made some sense for him. There was this guideline, like it made sense. And even the women in his life who deserved so much better, today we try to force some feminism, some feminism into them. And I do think some of them were quite ahead of their time, but feminism wasn't a thing back then. They all thought that he was right.
Yeah. There was only one thing back then, and that was Henry, and that's it. That's
exactly. He was literally the sun. He was in the middle of everything. He was the middle of everything of everyone did, of what everyone thought. So it's extremely difficult to grow as a person when you have this position in everyone's lives.
Anyway, I think we've answered T for T's question very well there between us.
I hope so.
You more than me, but I think we've done really well there. Talking of books and everything, Clemmie, where can people find out more about yourself? Are there any plans for new books? Any other social media sites you'd like to share?
Well, first, the book can be found on Amazon. So it's called The Apple and the Tree. I'm planning on putting the book on other platforms, but it's not there yet. So it's just Amazon for now. I am currently writing the sequel of The Apple and the Tree. It will be a duology. I have plans for other books later on, but this story will be a duology. I'm hoping to get it, to publish it by the end of the year. Let's see if that happens.
No rush.
Well, I'm trying, but when you have a full-time job on the side, it's difficult. And in terms of social media, I have TikTok and Instagram. I am mostly on TikTok. And actually, what I post on Instagram is usually the videos from TikTok. And I try, I do these little, I know. I do these little history videos on the Tudors, mostly on the Tudors. I try to do what I've been doing today, trying to put history back in context and just try to explain rather than just say the facts. Just trying to make it easy to understand and always try to remind people to put themselves in the shoes of the people that they judge now, whether positively or negatively.
I mean, there's loads for people to be looking at there. By the way, don't forget all of Clemmie's links will be in that description box below. And that, I'm afraid, is sadly where we have to leave it today. So I think we're all happy to get through that with Henry completely unscathed, like many of his former courtiers. So thank you so much, Clemmie, for taking the time for the chat today. I'd love to wish you all the success in the future. And it does sound like that you've got some exciting times ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was really nice. It was really fun.
It's been great. Thank you. And as always, everyone who tuned in, thank you so much. This is, in fact, the end of the current series of History Speaks, but we'll be returning in late November. So if you love history, you'll love History Roadshow. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our historical stories. So until next time, keep exploring the past with us, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.